Welcome back. The Israeli army considers itself a moral army. Its doctrine states that everything should be done to avoid harming non-combatants. In practice, though, the same army has a record of hitting civilians. The 40 Palestinian refugees who died in a UN shelter were by no means the first. In 1996, the Israeli army killed 106 Lebanese civilian refugees, more than half of them children, who'd been seeking shelter at a UN base in southern Lebanon. A UN investigation found that the UN compound had been shelled intentionally. In the 2006 war in Lebanon, the Israeli army hit private homes, ambulances and a truck crammed with children fleeing their village. 23 lives were lost in that incident alone, Israel saying a Hezbollah fighter was on board. Often justification is that Hamas or Hezbollah fighters use civilians as human shields or fire rockets from densely populated areas. With us still our guests in Tel Aviv, Yaakov Amridror, a retired Israeli general, in London, Claire Short MP, and in Doha, Azem Tamimi. General, let me ask you first of all, is it not a fact, though, that Israel does what it likes, really, because at the end of the day there will be no international consequences?
No, Israel does what is needed to defend itself, and mistakenly, from time to time, like the British forces and the American forces in Afghanistan, like the others in everywhere, if the terrorists taking shelter behind civilians, civilians will be part of the casualties of the war. If Israel wants to fight terrorism without hurting civilians, it must stop fighting terrorism. There is no way to fight terrorism who is behind civilians without making some casualties within the civilians.
Sure, is that not a fact, though?
For example, I'll give you, let me answer. You don't really answer. Last week we knew about a family which is living in a house which is full of explosive. We called the family and told them, please leave the house, and only then we bombed their house. And if we can do it, we are doing it. If we cannot do it, it's part of the war itself, we cannot prevent the fact that because the terrorists are fighting within civilians, civilians will be part of the casualties.
Claire Short, is it not a fact the General holds up a book detailing mistakes that other sides have made in different conflicts, but is it not a fact that there inevitably will be civilian casualties of war? I'm thinking back to the RAF's bombing of Dresden in the Second World War, a city packed with civilians, perhaps the ending of the war in the Pacific with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's all very well to be outraged at what Israel seems to be doing, but other sides have done the same thing through history.
Two wrongs don't make a right. The bombing of Dresden was absolutely wrong, and they were civilian targets, and Britain should never have done that. But the truth is, Israel doesn't care about civilian deaths. It doesn't care about breaching international law, and then it always says there were fighters there, and it doesn't cooperate with independent inquiries. I mean, remember, you didn't mention Sabra and Shatila in the litany of events that you just described. Israel doesn't want peace. Israel doesn't respect international law. Israel just wants to, it believes might is right. It doesn't care about international law. It wants to keep taking more and more territory in breach of international law, and it wants to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, and it leads to these monstrous events, and the international community is the cause of Israel getting away with this. If we would all stand up for international law, then Israel couldn't do it.
Well, I'd like to come back to that in just a moment and find out what you think could be done realistically, but let me ask Azem Tamimi at this point. If it is against international law for Israel to, in your opinion, target civilians, is it not also against international law for Hamas to do the same by firing rockets from Gaza into Israel at civilian populations?
You know, all this talk about civilians and non-civilians is unacceptable to me, because the entire population of Gaza is under siege. The entire population of Gaza has been persecuted by the Israelis. And let me ask your Israeli guests, what about the policemen who were massacred on the first day? Were they firing rockets at Israel? They were civil servants. In any society, policemen are civil servants. They are there to keep the order, to direct people, to guide them, to help them. Why were they massacred in large numbers, about 150 of them, in cold blood by the Israelis?
General, would you care to reply to that?
Yes, I can answer. Ask your friends from Fatah if they are civilians or civilian servants or part of Hamas control of Gaza, which killed more Fatah members than the Israelis. So before you are talking about this police as a civilian servant, reach the truth and agree that those are part of Hamas control of Gaza.
So now Israel is defending Fatah.
We're straying off the point here. Gentlemen, we are straying off the point, and I'm going to bring you back to it. I'm sorry about that. Azem Tamimi, I'm going to go back to my question, which you didn't answer. If it is wrong in international law for Israel to target civilians, is it not also wrong in international law for Hamas to be doing the same by firing rockets from Gaza at civilian population in Israel?
The reason why Hamas fires rockets on Israel is because the Palestinians continue to be under occupation, continue to be starved. And Hamas did offer the Israelis repeatedly. The first time was in 1994. They said to them, let's enter into a long truce arrangement, a long-term truce arrangement. Hamas even 3 times unilaterally observed truce that was not respected by the Israelis. Hamas is willing to spare both sides any pain and agony. But what can you do if your people continue to be killed? When there are 12,000 Palestinians in Israeli detention, they have mothers, they have wives, they have children who want to see them back in their house, and Israel keeps them in detention.
Okay, Mr. Tamimi, you're clearly not going to answer the point that I put to you, so I'm going to go back to the General to ask him about international law. If Israel is such a respecter of international law, as you and other people that I've interviewed over the last 12 days insist, how come there have been, at a conservative estimate, more than 60 UN resolutions condemning some of the moves that Israel has made, to which Israel has paid absolutely no attention whatsoever?
I'll answer you. In the United Nations there are 52 members who are Muslim countries, and they can reach an agreement that now in Tel Aviv it's 12 o'clock midnight, and the connection between truce and what the decisions of the United Nations is almost relating to Israel, almost none. So we know the problem of the United Nations. Israel is the only country in the world who cannot be member of the Security Council. Iran can be, Libya can be, Syria can be. Those democratic, open societies can be members of the Security Council. Israel cannot. So please don't quote the United Nations. We know the problem of United Nations. We are not going to behave or not to behave according to the United Nations. We have our moral. We are responsible for our morality. We are doing everything not to kill civilians. And if Hamas will not take shelter behind the back of his own people, these people will not be killed.
Claire Short, I'm going to come to you to give an overview, if you can, taking it away from somebody who's clearly very much in the Israeli camp, somebody who's very much in the Palestinian camp, to get your view on if somebody wants to bring Israel to account, if they believe that that is what should be done, is it possible? How would you do it?
The Geneva Convention lays down that all the high contracting parties, and most countries in the world have signed it, are responsible for enforcing international law. The problem is that Britain, the EU, the US particularly, will not stand up for international law, and therefore Israel keeps getting away with it. There's no question that it's endlessly breaching international law. As I say, the International Court of Justice made a major ruling in 2004 saying the wall's illegal, the settlements are illegal, etc., etc., and no one enforces it.
Right, so nobody enforces it now.
Seeing...
How do you change that? How do you get it round to the position that you and some other people wanted to be in, where Israel can be held to account?
You know, I think I'm ashamed of my government, because if we lose international law, we lose it everywhere, and the world is in chaos. And the way through, the way to peace and justice, Israel-Palestine, is to enforce international law on all sides. And then there would have to be a settlement. The 67 boundaries would give the Palestinians their state. The settlements would have to end, and we could have peace. But I'm afraid the United States and now the EU will not stand up for international law, and Israel believes might is right and will do whatever it wants. And this is why we've got this tragic and dreadful situation that's ripping the international system to bits and undermining the whole of international law.
Claire Short, thank you very much indeed for joining us. My thanks also to Yaakov Amidror, retired Israeli Army General, also to Azem Tamimi, author on Hamas. And thank you for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story from me, David Foster, and from the rest of the